It's completely bonkers. So your listeners won't know generally, everything they should do, that police officers, most of the arrangements are called police regulations. It's not normal employment law. They're sort of complicated and Byzantine. Some of it makes sense, but some of it's a bit extreme. And one part of it is, in many situations, the decision whether an officer gets sacked or not is effectively outsourced to a separate lawyer. So so here am I being challenged by you to say, sort this out, perfectly fair. And I'm saying, and so we come to a view, actually, all this evidence says this person should no longer be a police officer. We have to persuade an independent lawyer. And in many cases, they've said, no, you've got to keep them. So, but we can't use them. They're just not trustworthy.
Taking a look at the police today. We've just heard what happened when I went out in the police in South London. Well, listening to that was Sir Mark Rowley. He's the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and joins me in the studio now. Morning, Mark.
Hi, Matt. Yeah, good morning.
It's still morning.
It's been a long day already.
One of the striking things that I thought, listening to Chris, who I went out with, was when he said it wasn't a coincidence that there had been a spike in assaults on police, given everything we've heard, whether it's David Carrick or Wayne Couzens over the last couple of years. How does that make you feel about the force that you run, that some of your own staff essentially have undermined faith in the police so much that they now think the public think it's okay to attack your officers?
It's awful, isn't it? I mean, Chris and Danielle, I don't know if I've met them. I don't think I have, but they are just so typical of the tens of thousands of great men and women we have in the Met, who sort of, they're good, decent people. You can tell from that call, can't you, to trying hard to do a difficult job. And they've been sort of catastrophically undermined by the behaviour of a minority that the Met, in hindsight, over many years, we haven't been tough enough at protecting our integrity, and we're sorting that out, but the price is paid on a day-to-day basis. And even though the majority of people in London still trust the police, that trust is heavily dented, and we're going to have to work hard to turn that round again. But with great people like that, I know we can do it. And we're talking today in the context of, we've launched our new Met for London plan, which is exactly about how we're going to rebuild that trust.
It's quite a balancing act that you've got, trying to balance showing the public that you understand how angry they are, while also not attacking the Chris's and Danielles of the officers. And so, but in a way to reassure one, there's a risk you put too much on the other.
As a leadership challenge, which is what you're asking really, I found it immensely difficult. I've got tens of thousands of great people in an organisation of 45,000, but clearly I've got hundreds we've got to sort out, and it's trying to strike that balance the whole time and sort of supporting them, because some of the things that come out in recent work is sort of equipment and training. There's things that those officers need better, and we're trying to sort those things out for them. The pay issue's been very topical, and I was quite public about saying we've got to honour the pay review body last week, and we did that, and we found an extra £1,000 London allowance to sort of support officers. So I'm doing everything I can do to support the Chris's and Danielles whilst trying to take a cancer out one side of the organisation.
You talk about that cancer. It's clearly, we've had some very high-profile cases, but there are more coming. There were cases in the courts. There were cases still being investigated. Is the situation with the Met going to get worse before it gets better? So
I've been honest that this is the biggest doubling down on standards probably since Robert Mark was Commissioner in the 1970s. And there are 2 or 3 cases a week in court, and we're sacking and removing officers quicker than for decades. That's a really depressing thing to talk about as Commissioner, but I've had to put standards on the top line. I talk about more trust, less crime and high standards in the plan. Standards shouldn't be on the top line. That should be sorted. But because we've made a mess of dealing with a small number of toxic and dangerous individuals, I have to show the public that we're serious about that. But at the same time, of supporting officers like Chris and Danielle in the amazing work they do, trying to give them better equipment, better leadership, and organising ourselves better so that their work is manageable and that we're closer to communities.
And what's the what are the tests, if you like, that you will be judged by? Because clearly, your predecessor, Cressida Dick, stood down after Sadiq Khan lost confidence in her leadership. Mm-hmm. What are the things that you should be judged by? What does more trust, less crime, high standards look like? And do you resign? What point do you resign if you haven't met them?
In terms of what are the marks of success? So this is to talk through in the plan in detail. But do you, as a Londoner, have local officers who you recognise, who are looking after your patch, who understand what the priorities are locally and are making a difference there, tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. Do you, if you call the police for help, do you get a good service? So as a victim, are you satisfied with the response you get? Are we continuing to make progress in bringing volume crime like burglary and vehicle crime down? Are we succeeding in keeping serious crime down? With critical predatory offences like rape, domestic abuse, sexual assault, child abuse, are we bringing more offenders to justice? And are we reducing repeat victimisation? And in terms of some of the internal measures, are we more quickly and effectively getting through some of the misconduct and standards issues? So there's a range of measures that sort of captured there. And across all of that, are we tackling discrimination in the organisation and discrimination and disparity? So those are the measures that are in the plan. And the mayor will be holding me to account on those in public meetings. And that's his role and that's my role. I came back into policing from 5 years in retirement because I care about this, and it's because of the Chris's and Danielle's, and I know that we can bounce back and we can sort this out. But I'm not going to pretend it's easy. It's going to happen overnight.
Given what happened with Cressida Dick and given the reason you came back into it, is your job on the line if you don't deliver on those things?
I don't think in those terms because I don't entertain failure. This is bloody hard. But you met two determined frontline officers. I've got many people like that who are up for this challenge, and we will succeed. It will be a bumpy journey. It won't be perfect, but we will succeed because we want to. And last night I was launching our plan in Peckham. So we're doing 32 boroughs, a meeting in each community, meeting in Peckham in Southwark last night, and the community cared deeply about wanting a positive relationship with the police, regardless of the fact it hasn't always been perfect. We're at Damilola Taylor Centre, and of course he was murdered in 2000, tragically as a 10-year-old boy. His father, Richard, was there last night, and he spoke very powerfully to both the police in the room and the community members, young people in the room, that we need greater trust between police and communities. And his words were, because if we don't, the only people who benefit from that are the criminals.
Yeah. You touched on, you mentioned discrimination. One of the things that your report today says, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman or a member of London's LGBT plus community, whether you're disabled or from a black or ethnic minority background, we've heard the concerns you've raised. We're sorry and we'll change. But Louise Casey, when she carried out her review into the Met, she went further and said the Met was institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic. You don't accept the phrase institutional, but at what point... do you think the Met could ever be institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic? Because it seems pretty bad. And lots of people will look at it and think, well, why not accept that that's the case?
The challenge about that word is it means different things to different people. I'm not sort of... If you read the diagnosis that Louise Casey puts underneath that, she had 4 bullet points. I accept all those bullet points. I accept her analysis. It's just... I'm going to be talking about the Met month after month for the next 5 years, and I'm not going to use a word that I know means different things to different people. To some people, it means everybody in the organisation is racist. To other people, it means it's just about systems and policies, and there's every shade in between. So it's an imprecise word. It also kicks around quite heavily politically. I need to use precise language. Yes, we have those problems in the organisation. Yes, it's more than a few bad apples that we failed into systemically to root it out, and that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to be judged on action. So are we seen to bear down on standards and win back that public confidence that we are ruthless about protecting our integrity? That's getting rid of the negative. But the thing that will build trust, that's only getting rid of the negative. The thing that will build trust is the quality of policing, and that's what you were discussing yesterday with Chris and Danielle and seeing in the Raw.
I want to read you a quote that Louise Casey gave to the Times in an interview a few weeks ago. She, when she was pressed on this, the question of the using the word institutional, she threw her hands up in exasperation and said, "The level of delusion in this building, I don't know what happens when they come through the front door and they get into the lift." She calls the drinking water House Met and says that instead of fluoride, its ingredient is optimism. It's like they're drunk on House Met. They can't see anything outside. And these are potentially good people. Do you feel like you're drunk on optimism?
I'm not drunk on optimism at all. I don't think anyone's accused me of that. I've been pretty brutal about the scale of the challenges. I'm not standing away from those to any degree whatsoever. We are going to succeed as an organisation. We've got many good people. Our plan New Met for London built on Louise recommendations, things from other bodies, our own findings, feedback from tens of thousands of members of the public, and it's about changing an organisation so that it starts in communities and work backwards from there rather than starting at Scotland Yard. So absolutely not drunk on it. I came back into policing because I care deeply about this, and we must succeed, because if we don't, it's the criminals who gain, and we are going to succeed.
It struck me, I was astonished by this. You can't actually sack an officer.
It's completely bonkers. So your listeners won't know generally, everything they should do, that police officers, most of the arrangements are called police regulations. It's not normal employment law. They're sort of complicated and Byzantine. Some of it makes sense, but some of it's a bit extreme. And one part of it is, in many situations, the decision whether an officer gets sacked or not is effectively outsourced to a separate lawyer. So So here am I being challenged by you to say, sort this out, perfectly fair. And I'm saying, and so we come to a view, actually, all this evidence says this person should no longer be a police officer. We have to persuade an independent lawyer. And in many cases, they've said, no, you've got to keep them. So, but we can't use them. They're just not trustworthy, or they're dishonest, or they're not trustworthy with women.
And so are there officers that you'd like to have got rid of
Completely.
who are still officers because of this process?
Yeah, exactly. And so we end up having to put them on restrictions to minimise the damage they can do. It's completely ridiculous. So there's that fact. There's also an issue about if an officer fails a re-vetting, the process to remove them from the organisation is not exactly clear. I spoke in my first couple of months about this with the sort of Prime Minister and the Home Secretary. They commissioned a review at the start of the year, which I think was intended to report a couple of months ago. And I'm hoping that when it does report, they will get on and change the regulations.
So they're dragging their heels on this a bit.
I'm sure there's all sorts of technical reasons it's taking time, but I'm in a hurry to sort this out, and people like Chris and Danielle want it sorted out quickly. So if they can give us a better levers in the regulations to do it, that will help me go faster.
I want to ask you about a couple of specific issues which have come up when people have been sending in questions. Shoplifting. Chris was talking about how they've definitely seen an uptick in that. Maybe that's the sort of thing you see when inflation is so high. At the weekend, the boss of John Lewis, Sharon White, said that criminals have a licence to shoplift because so few incidents are investigated properly. They don't lead to anything. A licence to shoplift?
There's not a licence to commit any sort of crime. Of course, we do prioritise crime, and we spend more time investigating stabbings than we do shoplifting, but nothing's licensed.
What about drugs? You've talked about people being found using cannabis, being put on community programmes rather than facing criminal convictions. There's a story in the papers today about how cocaine use in some cities are up a quarter. If it's not a licence to shoplift, is it a licence to take recreational drugs?
Definitely not. We will deal with it. And if it's an individual user, then the balance between police intervention and sort of medical interventions, I think people understand there's a balance between the two. In terms of the drugs market, though, the drugs trade is really dangerous. We've stepped up our work on what people will know as county lines, the people selling drugs using phones and often using vulnerable teenagers to run the drugs for them. The people we're arresting behind the county lines are men of violence, and it hit some extraordinary statistics. The people we're arresting sort of week in, week out, several people a week for this, 1 in 10 of them have been arrested for murder previously. Wow. 1 in 6 have been previously arrested for firearms offences. 1 in 3 for grievous bodily harm. And it's nearly 90% have got previous records for violence or weapons of some degree. So these are the people running the drugs trade in London and coercing teenagers into moving the drugs around. So taking them off the streets and putting them in prison, sort of effectively rescuing those kids from that activity and sort of working on their safeguarding with local authorities is absolutely critical. So we're absolutely serious about drugs. The right sentence for a drugs user is laid down by government, and sort of interventions that take people out of crime seems to make sense to me.
Not that long ago, when I've asked you about Extinction Rebellion, they've also been replaced by their friends at Just Stop Oil. We've seen disruption again in the capital yesterday, slow marches in 14 locations. Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson told you to get out of your ivory tower and deal with them. Should people be more like Ben Stokes? Did you think he did a good job of wresting that protester to the ground?
I think it was Best, wasn't it? Johnny Bairstow who carried him off the pitch. Sorry to correct the journalist.
No, it's good. That's a good point. It was Johnny Bairstow.
So I find JSO massively frustrating, like all Londoners do. If people want to protest, there are lots of ways to protest lawfully, but the law is really clear. You're not entitled to protest to the point where you cause serious disruption to other people going about their daily life. And so, I mean, I think there were more than 14 in yesterday. I think that was the stats at the start of the day in terms of JSO. We had that many slow marches, I think, in the first hour or two of yesterday. I think in 13 out of those 14, we managed to get to the scene very quickly, and they were off the road within a few minutes of police arrival. The other one, I think there were sort of several tens of people there, and we made about 20 arrests, and that took a bit longer. So we are sort of determinedly serious to clear this. I just wish people would protest in line with the law rather than going beyond it. And of course, there's another impact for Londoners out of this, besides the immediate disruption. I had 550 police officers yesterday doing this work on JSO. They should have been working in communities fighting crime rather than dealing with this nonsense because people won't protest in line with the law.
We've had quite a lot of questions as well about the thin blue line badge. This was officers were banned from wearing it, particularly during Pride marches, but during other things as well. Explain what the issue is, because officers I've spoken to say, it's just a way of remembering officers who've fallen in the course of duty. So,
as police officers, we have to be really careful about being without fear or favour, and I'm sure you'd agree with that. Our policy lays down only 2 or 3 things that people are allowed to wear routinely. Obviously, one's the poppy at Remembrance Day as an example. There is a police memorial badge that officers can wear to remember colleagues. The issue with this badge, and it's not sort of black and white. It's not a straightforward thing. For some people, it's about the politics of pay cuts and sort of budgets for policing. For some people, it's about police heroism. It also has a tinge of link in the United States, the equivalent to extreme right-wing groups. And so the challenge of any badge, you end up with something which means different things to different people. And I'm not going to. I don't want to stop officers from sort of remembering their sort of colleagues who've suffered, and that's why we do have a police memorial badge. But I'm very cautious about a badge which means different things to different people, because then if someone interprets that like the American and like being linked to the far right, then that doesn't help us either. So I understand why officers are frustrated about it, but it's quite a complicated issue. And if you saw officers wearing all sorts of politicised badges, you'd be asking me hard questions about that for lots of good reasons.
One final question that someone sent in. Has he actually done any police work? Which I sort of know the answer to, but it's an interesting question, particularly given that. Yeah. Do you miss it? Which did you prefer? Sitting in an office making all these decisions, being accused of being drunk on House Met or whatever it's called?
So I'm not quite sure what the House Met thing is. So yes, I joined policing and I started walking the streets of Birmingham in a long time ago, 1987. Unfortunately, which shows how old I am. So I've worked on the streets of Birmingham. I've been a detective as a detective sergeant. I've done practical day-to-day policing, and I've got the scars to show for it. I'm passionate about it, and candidly, I am patrolling out of Digbeth Police Station in Birmingham, which might mean something to some of your listeners. Patrolling out of Digbeth Police Station in Birmingham, I enjoyed what I did then as much as I enjoy the privilege of being commissioner now, and trying to make just as Chris and Danielle were talking earlier about the job being sort of exciting and interesting and worthwhile. I find the same thing in this job as I did patrolling out of Digbeth Police Station 36 years ago.
Do you still sometimes go out now?
I go out to police stations, meet officers regularly. Occasionally go out on patrol. Yeah. I'm not a sharper as good as they are. I don't pretend to. And there's a danger that sort of I know a senior officer goes out, it ends up being a bit like dad dancing. So if you're not careful. So Chris and Danielle are doing it day in and day out and are fantastic at it.
You're not leaping over fences like you used to.
No, I run an awful lot to keep fit. So I challenge I can still pass the highest fitness test in the organisation for our most advanced firearms officers. So I keep myself healthy. But my job has different demands to what those guys are doing.
Mark, it's really good to see you. Thanks so much for coming in. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, joining us on Times Radio.